Welcome to the latest edition of the Shukri Wrights podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights. This guest that I have on today has either delighted or angered Boston sports fans for the last 12 plus years on 98.5 The Sports Hub and NBC Sports Boston as the co-host of Felger Mazz. The one and only, as I like to call him, the legend, the myth, the man himself, Tony Massarotti, joins the podcast today. Good morning to you. How are you doing today?
You too, Shukri. Appreciate you having me. I know you reached out a while back, so I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I want to start the podcast talking about the big news that has broken here in New England. As of the time of the recording, it broke literally maybe 7 minutes ago. Again, this is at the time of the recording. Jerry Remy, longtime Red Sox color analyst on NESN, has passed away from lung cancer. The news was broke by Channel 5 just several minutes ago. And I wanted to start the podcast talking about Jerry Remy. And Tony, I want to ask you, one thing that has hit me the most as a baseball fan is how much a broadcaster, especially a color analyst at that, has meant to a particular region. And what are your thoughts on Jerry Remy as we begin the process to remember his life and also his career as the Red Sox broadcaster on NESN?
So, look, I mean, I just told you I've been running around a little bit this morning, and just as we were setting up here, you had mentioned to me that that this had happened. So I had not even heard it until you mentioned it to me. And look, I'm saddened like everybody is. And I worked with Jerry a long time. And I feel personally indebted to him on a lot of different levels. I knew it wasn't going great this time around in terms of his health. And he didn't, I reached out to him a couple of times and he usually answers and he didn't. And so I sort of got an idea that maybe things weren't going great. And then, I asked around a little bit too and got the same sense. But he was a great guy for me to learn from when I covered the Red Sox. He was a guy I could go to, after games, before games, sometimes between innings, and ask him about things that happened on the field, in terms of what protocol. Like, he just was a great resource, and not just on the field stuff, off the field stuff too. I remember when I was getting married and I said to Jerry, look, you're one of the, you've been married to the same person your whole life. Not easy to do in the baseball world. How did you pull it off? Especially with all the road trips. And he said, the travel isn't always a bad thing. Like, it gets you away from your significant other. So look, I used to talk to him about a lot of different things. And, he was a guy that I don't want to babble on and on, Shukri, but he in his job, and in our business, I think sometimes you forget that, people sort of invite you into their lives for a little while. And whether it's at night during a game or whether they're driving to work and turning on a show, and, they feel like they know you in some ways, and you feel like you know them if they happen to call in, or you run into someone who mentioned something to you at a grocery store or whatever else. And so Jerry had that effect. He was, he covered the Red Sox or did the broadcast for a long, long time. And I think people really felt like they knew him. I think as he is, as he has aged and dealt with a lot of different things in terms of his health here over the last several years, I think he was pretty open about it. So people felt like they knew him, and they were able to sort of empathize with him if they had family members or friends or whoever else that went through some of the many things that he went through. And, it's a loss. Guys like Jerry, in some ways I equate him to Tommy Heinsohn of the Celtics.
I agree.
Yeah, they become part of, become part of the fabric of the city. And we all know what sports mean here in Boston. So, I mean, I'm heartbroken. It's been a lot of guys that we've lost in the last few years, whether it's Nick Cafardo of the Globe or Bob Newmeyer recently, Tommy, Jerry Remy. It's sadly, it's a growing list in recent years here. And he was a good guy. I thought the world of him. And, we used to joke, Jerry had a bit of a crusty exterior. But if he let you inside of that, if you were able to penetrate that, he was really a really good-hearted guy. And so I feel for his family. I know, I've met his wife, Phoebe. I don't really know his kids, but I know that he meant well, and he was a good-hearted guy. So I was sorry to hear it.
Yeah. Thank you for like really going into detail. I did not mind you being wordy whatsoever. Like that was a good moment of laughter just a few moments ago. But as someone who grew up in New York, born and raised, and people who have followed and listened to my sports radio shows nationally and locally, and those who have listened to the podcast know, born and raised in New York, moved to Boston in February 2017. My first introduction to Jerry Remy was actually watching some of the Red Sox games on Nesson from afar when it was Don Orsillo and Jerry Remy. And Orsillo and Remy were like that team that, even though I'm not a Red Sox fan, but I watched it, I listened, I'm like, oh my God, this is like the perfect duo that brought comedic humor to a lot of really, as I like to say, down moments in a game that they just knew how to liven up a broadcast. And Jerry was that type of individual who brought humor, wasn't afraid to show that. And I got the sense when I was visiting Boston in the summer of 2015, just about less than 2 years before I moved there, that he was an absolute part, a massive part of the city. You mentioned Tommy Heinsohn, who I watched Tommy Heinsohn along with Mike Gorman for years, leading up to his passing a year ago. But Jerry Remy with Red Sox Nation, it was like a glove on a hand. It just fits. And when you talk about Jerry Remy and his place in this city in terms of broadcasters who developed a special relationship, where would you put, not that you're putting him above anyone else, but where would you place him in terms of Red Sox Nation, especially when you talk about the passionate fan base who follow the team religiously on a nightly basis?
Oh, I mean, I think for people that grew up in this era, he was as much a part of the Red Sox as anybody. So, when I was growing up, the broadcasters were, Ned Martin used to do the games on TV, and Jerry worked with Ned at the very beginning. And then, Ned was part of radio. Joe Coleman, or Ken Coleman, rather. Joe Coleman was a pitcher. So, there were Kirk Gowdy, my dad's age, people like Kirk Gowdy but those were the play-by-play guys. Jerry was, again, Tommy to me is a good comp because they both played for the franchise. The one thing I would say that separated Jerry from Tommy was that Jerry was from here. I mean, he was, he grew up in New England. If I remember right, I want to say he's like from the Fall River area. I think he's from Swansea, if I remember right. So, Jerry was, is a native New England, native Bostonian, really, and spent his whole life here. I mean, obviously, he began his career with the Angels, but most people, I think, remember him as a Red Sox. And he had New England qualities too, which is I say, again, I joke, I say he had a crusty exterior, but
yeah,
we're not the most welcoming people all the time. We can be just a little guarded.
Yeah.
And so I mean, to me, in this era, he's as synonymous with the Red Sox as anybody. Players come and go, executives come and go. Jerry was here for, if you count his playing career, we're talking 50 years now.
Yeah. Wow.
He came over in the mid 70s, late 70s, I think 77, 78, he came. And then, has been here ever since, played here, raised his family here, lives here now, never left. So, I just thinking off the top of my head as we talk, there is a Johnny Pesky type of quality to Jerry Remy too.
Oh,
and Johnny was around the organization a long time, obviously worked for the team. It was a little bit different, but he did do some time as a broadcaster as well. And so his place is as significant or greater than just about anybody in a comparable role. Again, I put, he and Tommy to me are very similar to me. And, they're, and I would say even personality wise, they were a little similar. Tommy could be kind of crusty on the outside too.
Yeah.
but really had a genuinely warm and giving heart, and was a really good guy. And I think people that, got to know him a little bit, and I didn't know Tommy as well as I knew Jerry, but they're both similar in that way. And, again, like you take for granted sometimes. And in the case of the Celtics, I covered the Celtics for a short period of time, and was around there too, but I was more apt to turn on the TV and watch a Celtics game than the Red Sox games I was at. So I totally get the connection people felt to Tommy and feel to those broadcasters because, again, I lived it with Tommy. And, it's hard to find many guys that do what those guys have done for the length of time that they've done it. So as I think about it outside, you say, okay, well, Gil Santos, Gino Cappelletti certainly did the Patriots radio broadcast for a long, long time. They qualify, but the football is a national broadcast. That one changes all the time. The Bruins have had some turnover in that booth. Brick has been there a long time now, Andy Brickley. But it's hard to find people that last in those jobs for that length of time and become as much of a part of the city as those guys have. And, Jerry was certainly that. I'd be willing to bet he's as synonymous with Boston as any other broadcaster is in just about any other market in America. I mean, there are certain guys that become staples of that, to that sport and franchises, even if they were just broadcasters and not players. Jerry was both, obviously. But, you think Red Sox TV, you think Jerry Remy. I don't think there's a doubt about that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great point because as you said that, my mind started thinking about Phil Rizzuto. Like growing up being a native New Yorker, he was the voice of the Yankees for an extended period of time.
Absolutely.
And like you talk about broadcasters who also play for the team, play for the Yankees, part of the 5-peat Yankees of the late 40s or early 50s, mid 50s as well. He was someone who defined a generation of broadcast in New York in the same way with Jerry Remy being part of, like, whenever you turn on the TV at night, he was there. And as you mentioned, I agreed, like they don't come around often. And when they are there, you have to appreciate them. And in the loss of Jerry Remy, and it's really beginning to sink in. And I'm going to talk to a lot of my friends who grew up here and have been lifelong Red Sox fans to really get a scope so that I can understand more just how much he's meant to New England in the Red Sox nation. And speaking of the Red Sox, the season just ended a little more than a week ago. And there's a long laundry list of questions that I have for the Red Sox going into 2022. One of them is Chris Sale.
Yeah.
I am beginning to legitimately wonder, the contract that he signed prior to the start of the 2019 season is beginning to look more and more of an albatross. Is it fair to start heaping criticism at Chris Sale in regards to his inability to perform in the postseason? Whereas whenever I listen to local sports media, there's not much criticism that's geared towards Chris Sale as there were towards David Price. Is that a fair assessment?
Totally, 100% fair. And it should get talked about more. It doesn't. Look, I think part of the reason it hasn't come up of late is just because he missed time, right? And now people want to take this most recent struggle as saying, okay, well, he's coming back from Tommy John, which is true. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't great in the postseason when he was healthy and when he was good. And so, yeah, I think it's a legitimate gripe and complaint or concern. So what happens going forward? I don't know. I do think that the sale we're going to see in April next year, at the beginning of the year, April, May, somewhere in there, will be better than the sale we saw at the end of this season. Those Tommy John guys typically take 2 years from the time of the surgery. So this was 18 months. He didn't have the surgery really until the beginning of 2020, which was a mistake on their part. They obviously signed him to an extension before Dombrowski got fired, which was also a mistake. I don't think it's wrong to call that contract an albatross. And but I do, the thing to me is, if you were to say, well, why did he struggle in the postseason this year? I'd tell you, well, he wasn't the same guy. Okay. But then why did he struggle in the past? I would tell you, because he wears down in September and October. I mean, this is something we talked about when he first got here. They were trying to find ways to make sure he could maintain his strength at the end of the season. I mean, the guy's built out of popsicle sticks and toothpicks.
Literally.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he's a rail. And so, and again, I know he's tried to gain weight and everything else, but I think this is why he tires at the end of the year and doesn't have the same kind of juice in the tank. He just wears down, which you can understand. But whatever it is, it's there. His career ERA in the playoffs is over 7, or was right around over 7 before he took them out at the end of the playoffs. So is he a guy you can rely on in October? No. Fact. So can that change? Sure. Change for David Price. It changes for a lot of guys. But based on what we know right now, it's and I'll tell you another one that people don't talk about is Bogaerts. Bogaerts in October
That's a
hasn't
great
been any
point.
great shakes either.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's another one I think you look at and say that those are guys that you cannot rely on in October.
Why do you think that Bogaerts can't be relied upon offensively in October? We know that what he can do in the regular season, he's proved it time and time again. But for some guys in October, it's like, oh, I'm going to freeze up now. I don't know if I could still produce offensively the way that I did in the regular season. Why do you think that is with Bogaerts?
So that's a good question. As you were talking, I was just trying to punch this up because
Sure.
I'd love to look I'd love to look it up. I know his career average in the postseason is under 240. Okay, so that I know. What I was trying to look up though is maybe there's a similar thing there with him in terms of the month of September. So I was trying to look up September to see, does he fade at the end of the regular season? And it doesn't look like he does. I mean, his career OPS in September, October, and that's regular season, I was over 800. But I will say that if you look at his numbers during the course of the year, and I'm giving you OPS now, right?
Yeah.
Career in May, 826 in April, 889 in May, and then 799, 773, 759. So he gets worse. He gets worse in the second half. Now, again, the September, October numbers tick up again. But looking at it and instinctively, I would tell you that Bogaerts wears down. He's a guy that he's a big guy. He's not like Sale. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's, 6'2", 215 or whatever he is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a big guy, particularly for his position, but he likes to play every day. He doesn't like to come out of the lineup. And this is one of those to me that maybe you put some of this on the Red Sox and say, you got to take him out. He's got to get, instead of playing 150 games, maybe you cut that number to 140 and you chop off another 10 games and you're giving him breaks during the course of the year. And you give him even if you were to get the number a little below that 135 range, you give him 25 games off. That's another month. And maybe you get a better Bogaerts in October. And, beyond that, I don't look at Bogaerts and say, well, he can't hit good pitching, right? Because I think he can. And he's also inclined with 2 strikes to hit the ball the other way, which makes him a tougher out. So it doesn't add up. The only thing I can come to is that he needs to back off during the regular season and not play so many games.
When you talk about shortstops that are big, I immediately had flashback to Jeter, not just because I'm a Yankee fan, but Cal Ripken. But those were guys that perform well in October. Do you think it has a lot to do with perhaps the mental makeup of the player than the physical breakdown as to why a player like Bogaerts fades away in the second half?
Yeah, I mean, look again. As I sit here and I sound like I'm making excuses for him, there is the possibility. He just chokes. I mean, it could be that simple. So as you said, I'd have to go back and look at games played for Jeter. My recollection is he played a ton.
Yeah.
And Jeter was money in the playoffs. We all know he was a better player in October than he was during the regular season. And he just, the focus sharpened, everything got better. And he was, as cool as anybody could get.
Yeah.
So now Ripken, I would argue Ripken wore down late in seasons and certainly late in his career because he played too much. So, that whole Iron Man thing, I think we've come to understand is a little overrated, because what good is playing every day if you're at 75% of what you normally are when you could be at 85 or 90. So, but yeah, I think it's absolutely, a lot of those guys held up fine. It could just be that, like you said, could be makeup. I mean, he might be a guy that gets in the biggest moments and puts pressure on himself and cracks. And there's a lot of people like that. The world is filled with people like that. The people who perform in October are really the exceptions, right? More than the rule. And those are the ones we remember for that reason, because let's face it, we all put pressure on ourselves.
Absolutely. And you talk about players who perform in October are rather the exception rather than the rule. Talk about Eddie Rosario, for Pete's sake. This guy has been an absolute revolution. Like, he's been like a revelation in October. Prior to 2021, like, I mean, let's be honest, we may have heard of the name, but you didn't know what he can do in October. This year, as the Atlanta Braves at the time of this recording, they are one win away from winning a World Series title for the first time since 1995. And Eddie Rosario is one of the major reasons why.
Yes.
When you look at Rosario, for example, and what he's been doing in the outfield, does it surprise you that a guy that oftentimes gets overlooked by the analytics turns out to be money in October? Because let's face it, he was a trade deadline pickup for the Braves that was going nowhere fast come the end of July.
Yeah. So look, I told my father this morning. My father's a baseball fan. He's 85 years old. He asked me about this guy. He asked me what you just did. Like, this Rosario guy, did you see the catch he made last night? I said, you know what?
Oh, yeah.
I wanted the Red Sox to sign this guy during the offseason. I'm not kidding. They needed a left-handed hitting outfielder. And if I remember right, again, I tried to punch him up. I was looking it up here. Mm-hmm. I think he's from Puerto Rico.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's Puerto Rican. So I immediately thought, like, when they were looking at candidates, right, Cora. I said, Cora's got to know this guy. Every time I saw him with the Twins, he was a pain in the ass to pitch to.
Yeah.
Right. And he's not he's not a patient guy. He doesn't walk much. He swings the bat.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons the analytics people don't like him, is because he doesn't take his walks, but he can hit. He's got some power. And so I thought he'd be a good fit for the Red Sox. I still don't know whether they made a run at him. My guess is that Cora probably did. But, he had better options on the table, or the Red Sox weren't as appealing to him because he thought they were going to suck, right? Like a lot of people did. And so, to me, Rosario started the year with Cleveland, I think, right?
Yes, correct.
So, and then got traded to the Braves. So to me, that's a perfect kind of guy you go to try to pick up. And I just think, there are certain players that just like to play. Right? They like to play. And I thought the Red Sox did a pretty good job of going out and getting some of those guys this past season. And Rosario, to me, always struck me as that kind of guy. So, sometimes as much as we joke about the analytics people and they don't like the walks, sometimes you want guys at the plate in October who want to swing the bat.
Yes.
Go up there. I'm looking to hit it. I'm not looking to walk. And those guys can get themselves out sometimes, but in a big spot with men on base, when the pitcher has to come in the zone, they're going to be looking to hit. That's just the way they're wired. And that catch last night, part of me thought, oh my God, he just stuck his glove on.
What a catch.
Oh, seriously. Like, he looked at the wall and kind of stuck his glove out. And I thought, wow, that thing just literally fell in his glove. Yeah. So I regard him as more of an offensive player than a defensive player. But, look, he's been huge. He's been absolutely huge for them since they picked him up.
You want to talk about doing a side-by-side comparison between Yordan Alvarez and Eddie Rosario, nearly in identical spots, trying to attempt to make a catch last night in the outfield. And it's like, what went wrong here? I know that Alvarez nearly hurt himself running full speed into the left field padded fence, but Rosario was able to make the catch that he made, which really, I mean, this World Series, despite the fact that it could be over by the time Sunday night rolls around,
right?
It's been one unbelievable series. But there is one thing that is gnawing the hell out of me before I shift gears, and that is analytics. Yet again, I despise analytics with a fever pitch passion, Tony. Listen, last year I went off when I was doing my show on 100.1 FM WBRS. When Kevin Cash decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take out Blake Snell in the 8th inning of an elimination game for the Tampa Bay Rays, and I said, you know what, to hell with analytics. They can literally burn themselves to the ground for all I care about. Elliot Anderson has 5 no-hit innings,
right?
Rolling through the game, going through game 3, and Brian Snitker, the manager for the Atlanta Braves, says, that's enough. We're going to take you out. We're going to go to the bullpen. So I'll ask you this. Why did baseball allow itself to get to this point? And also, is there any sort of chance that baseball can return back to some of the old school practices in which that if a pitcher is rolling, don't take him out. Just leave him in there until he can't go no more.
Well, I'll tell you what I loved about that Snicker thing too, is that like ESPN had this story, he defied analytics and he went with his gut. Okay. My ass, he did. He went with the analytics. Like, who's kidding who here? Like, that was purely, I don't care what he said. That was an analytics-based decision. No manager in his right mind would have taken a guy out as pitching a no-hitter. Nobody ever does or used to. Yeah. So now it happens all the time. So I think it was totally analytics-driven. And, so you say, why do they do it? Because it works. It works. So again, like, you look at those numbers the third time through, and the chances of pitchers getting guys out the third time they see them, they drop by like 50%. I mean, the drop is significant. So now look, does that mean they're right every time? No. Because again, I hated the Snell decision too. I couldn't stand it. But more often than not, look at Alex Cora did it with Chris Sale. Yeah. Right? He left him in, Sale gave it up. It was like clockwork. And so I think that, managers are we know too much now, right? There's so much data out there that some of it's accurate. And so they say, well, my chances get 50% better if I take him out of the game and go to a fresh reliever, right? And so that's what they choose. Now, I'm with you. I hate it. And honestly, I think it's a big problem in the game. I know that Buster Olney wrote about this for ESPN. It's a good point. So think of all the great games, like, one of the real baseball is entertainment like any other sport. And one of the great things that the game has given us over the years, like any sport, is just great individual performances. Well, now you don't get that from starting pitchers anymore. Pedro Martinez's 17 strikeout game at Yankee Stadium. We're not getting that today because they're pulling his ass out of the game way before that. Or, Bob Gibson on 3 days rest, 1-4-7 in the World Series, or, take your pick. I mean,
Randy Johnson in the 2001 World Series.
Right. All these, they don't happen now. So you might get a guy, pitch in game 2, come out of the bullpen in game 4, but in game 2, he's only going 4 innings. You're not going to get some of the great individual starting pitching performances that we have seen in postseason history, or for that matter, regular season history. Right. The complete games that existed in baseball this year, I think there was like 45, 47, something like that.
In that range.
Number. 6 of them were no hitters. So the point is, those guys wouldn't have stayed in the game either. Like, let's not kidding, who's kidding who. So I hate it. I think it's bad because, as fans, we're in it for the story. I know they're in it to win, and I get that. And that's important. It is.
Absolutely.
But we're in it for the story. We're in it for, can that guy go and strike out 15? Can he make it the whole way? We want to see people push the limits like that. And now they don't let you do it. And so what do? Click. I'll watch the highlights tomorrow. Seriously.
Truly, especially now that we have MLB Network, it's like, why should I stay up to watch this? Oh, totally. I'll just go do something else or watch something else for goodness sakes.
100%. It's maddening. Yeah. And it's, because to me, the starting pitcher was often, not always, often.
Absolutely.
A reason to watch the game. Yeah. Like, I'm going to watch tonight. Pedro's pitching. Clemens is pitching. Or Mike Mussina pitching a perfect game at Fenway. Carl Everett comes up and, breaks it up with 2 outs in the 8th or the 9th. Those are the reasons to stay in, to state it. I can't leave this game because the pitcher is doing something great. Now there's no reason to stay.
Oh, 100%. And speaking of that particular moment, that as it's become somewhat of a legendary moment in a way, Mussina losing a perfect game, the Hall of Famer losing a perfect game with 2 outs, and Carl Everett says, your night's ruined. Screw you. And as we all know, I'm sorry. As we all know, this was 9 days before 9/11, about roughly 9 days before 9/11, and we just commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and now I've been seeing a lot of clips and highlights from that 2001 World Series, which I remember vividly living in New York at that time, through 9/11. And as we all know, and we're both old enough to fully remember the impact of 9/11 in sports at that time. And one thing I want to touch on is you were on the beat covering the Red Sox at the time, correct?
Yes.
And in what way did 9/11 impact you as a beat writer covering the Red Sox, and as well as just looking at baseball as a whole, as baseball did its part to help bring the country together in terms of healing after such a traumatic tragedy that rocked the nation and the world?
Oh, so look, I mean, some people know this already. On the morning of 9/11, I flew out of New York. So
Wow.
the Red Sox were supposed to play the Yankees on Monday night, September 10th, and the game got rained out.
Yeah.
So we were due to fly the next day down to Tampa, where the Red Sox were playing down there, and the flight was at like 8:30 or something like that. So we're
I
up
never
at
do. I never heard the story, by the way. I just want to. I'm
oh
just
yeah
like, wow.
yeah. So no, look at the flights that flew into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
I know one of them originated in
From
Boston, maybe
Boston.
both did. Yeah,
No, one of them was out of Newark.
out of Newark. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, I know neither one of them was out of New York. That much I remembered. But we left that morning, we're on our way to Tampa, and we were in the air when the pilot told us what was going on and that we were being rerouted to Atlanta. And so, people immediately started getting on their cell phones, calling family. And some people got on, if you remember, they used to have those air
Yeah.
phones.
Yeah. I remember those. Yeah.
And you put your credit card in and make a phone call. And so we got rerouted. And I remember, in the air, look, like, you're in your own little world not half the time. And, there were a bunch of us who covered the team on that plane. I think there were 5 of us. Sean McAdam, who was then of the Providence Journal, was sitting in the row in front of me. And, he said, well, how are we going to get to Tampa for the game? And I said, I don't know, maybe we'll take a train, maybe we'll rent a car. If they're pulling planes out of the sky, we're not going to be able to fly there.
Yeah.
And then about 10 minutes went by and I tapped Sean and I said, Sean, they're not going to play tonight. They're going to cancel everything. Like they're going to shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about like a Pearl Harbor type attack, right? Like, and I'm getting off track here, but the bottom line is they ended up canceling the series in Tampa. But during that whole sequence, like for a lot of people, it's a lot of time for us to think. And I can tell you this, that I lost interest in baseball. Writing about the Red Sox didn't seem all that important to me at that particular point in time. They were having a tough year that year. They weren't a very likable team. They were falling apart. And so, there wasn't a whole lot of reason to be motivated to write about the Red Sox. But once the games came back and, we started to get back into our routines. I was at the World Series that year. And I think that, we learned this again with the marathon bombing in Boston, that sports are a big part of us getting back to what we do. And sports are what bring us together. Even if we are Red Sox fans and Yankees fans, when 9/11 happened and, the first pitch was thrown out at Yankee Stadium and people were happy to be in, crowded environments again. And we started to feel a little safer. We were able to rally around the things that we typically shared, which are the World Series and the Super Bowl. And, as much as these are competitions, they're also a way for us to, to bond. I mean, that's what the country bonds over a lot of times. So I've said this before, Shukri. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Invictus.
I haven't.
Or read the book. So, Matt Damon's in it. It's about the South African rugby team and how Nelson Mandela used it as a tool to really to unify the country. Because the one thing that people could rally around was a sports team. Like once you're competing against other countries, now everybody's on the same side. And, it's a lot like the Olympic hockey team here in 1980 when, the country was really kind of down and they made a run and won the gold medal. And a bunch of college kids that really sort of allowed the whole country to bond. And I think that, look, that's one of the great things about sports, right? As long as we keep them in perspective, they are something that you can share with someone you don't know from a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
Like, you run into someone at a Dunkin' Donuts, you start talking about the Patriots game from the day before.
Yeah.
And, so to me, I have a vivid memory of being at Yankee Stadium for that World Series.
Wow.
And, it was a striking moment. No question.
Like I was in fifth grade at the time, and it should give you a little bit of an idea just how old I am. And and I remember watching those games at home, and like living in New York at that time, and I had people on Twitter ask me like, hey, like you're from New York, like do you remember living through 9/11 in New York? I said 500%. Yeah. Like I remember one of the striking memories that I still have, because I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in Manhattan. I grew up in Brooklyn, and the part of Brooklyn that I grew up in is a neighborhood called Bushwick, in which that if you're on the J subway line, which goes into Manhattan over the Williamsburg Bridge, you used to be able to see the World Trade Center, the original Twin Towers, plain sight, beautiful. And I remember that day seeing the smoke, and it was a striking sight that I will never forget. And I remember hearing about how sports was going to be shut down because the night before, it was a Monday night football game. The Yankee game had, as you mentioned, it got rained out. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I told my dad, Dad, I'm not going to bed early. I'm like, hey, there's some football on. I'm like, oh yeah, the Giants and Broncos about to play. Yay. Nope. And they got their asses handed to them by the Broncos. And it was like, oh, damn it. But now there's no sports. And being a big Yankee fan that I am, there was no baseball for 6 days. Like in the NFL that weekend decided to postpone its games. And the thing I keep thinking about was that first 6 to 10 days after, how sports, whether it was Boston, New York, or even nationally, it just took on a whole different meaning when it came to like rallying and coming together. And
absolutely.
And the one thing I want to ask you is when it comes to events such as that, and even like, for example, with the pandemic, we'll go back to last year when the world really began to shut down around March 11th. How important was it for sports to return to as close to normalcy in 2021 as compared to ever than before, when we were not able to come together in ballparks and arenas and enjoy sporting events?
Oh, I think it was huge. And look, I know there was some criticism of, public officials at the time. Donald Trump was an easy target for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
But he did say he wanted to get sports back up and running. And I think that his heart in that one was in the right place.
Yeah.
And that, he understood what it means to us. It's a distraction. It's something we sink our teeth into. It's something we're passionate about. We like sports in this country. And so it gives us a routine. It gives us something we care about, and it gives us a distraction that, helps us deal with the day-to-day stuff. And, as you were talking about the World Trade Centers, I remember when we were, on that trip I was talking about, when we drove, we found out they were canceling the Tampa Bay series. The next series the Red Sox had was going to be in Baltimore. And so we started to drive. We decided as a group, we rented like a minivan. The 5 of us hopped into a van and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to drive together. We're going to rent a van. We're going to drive to Baltimore. And so, on our way up there, we passed, and maybe it was after we left Baltimore and we started coming back to Boston, because we came back as a group. On 95, we passed Manhattan. And the image that I still have was the one that you have of like smoke and ash, and the city was dark, and it was a real eerie sort of silhouette. And, it was a really dark, depressing time in American history for lots of reasons. And, again, sports are a vehicle. I think we forget sometimes that, I'm in Boston, you're in New York, you're rooting for this team, I'm rooting for that team. This guy's in Green Bay, this guy's in Dallas. Like, but at the end of the day, it's really a lot bigger than all of us. And so we sort of start to say, okay, well, we really all should be on the same side when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
And I think like events like that do remind you of that. So, sports are a great way for us to do that. And I think that's why they mean as much as they do. There's a real, again, if you were to, I was in Lambeau Field a couple of weeks or last weekend for the Packers game. I got invited to go out there. I took my 14-year-old. And, one of the great things about that environment is you really do get a sense of what the football team means to the community.
Yes.
Right. Like the football team is the community in Green Bay. Everything is built around the football team. It's like a high school football town in that way, like in Texas or something.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to get all corny and sappy on
you. Oh, no, please.
But I do think that, that's one of the great things about sports, right? It gets the big games, the big events are great moments that everyone can kind of dig into and say, okay, who's going to win? And then at the end of the night, you walk away, and we dissect it and analyze it. And the talk show hosts on the radio rip the people who made the mistakes. And, that's what we do. Right. But it is, if you think about it, I mean, how many people are in front of their televisions watching the Super Bowl at the same time?
Yeah.
The whole country digs into that one. And so they really can be the kind of events that build, bonds and what a morale, things like that. And with regard to the pandemic, I think that it was huge to get some of these sports back on TV.
Yeah.
The only downside was because the routines were altered, we knew it wasn't the same. Right. So I think that, they were playing in a bubble. There were no fans in the crowd. They tried to dress it up for TV. It was fake crowd noise, but it wasn't the same, which is why I think the ratings went down. So people just said, I just can't, I don't have my regular life. Even the sports aren't the same. I can't get into it. So they gave us some of it as much. The sports gave us as much as they could in that time. But once we got back into the stadiums and, the crowd became a part of the game again, then I think it started to really tick up.
Absolutely. And speaking of football, the Patriots, they are an interesting team. And I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, where I look at this 2021 Patriots team and I say to myself, what the hell how do I make of this team? Like, I want to like this team. I want to root for this team, but I'm a realist, not negative, not positive. I'm a realist. When I look at this current 2021 Patriots team, I look at this team and I say, I don't know if they're good enough to be a playoff team. While on the other hand, I'm like, this team just might be able to sneak in as a wild card. They had a big game against the Chargers this week. And let's face it, they're 3-4. They're coming off their first home win against the New York Jets, which was an absolute shellacking of epic proportions. You look at this matchup between the Patriots and Chargers, and we're just looking at it from a pure win and loss perspective. If they win, okay, they're at 500. Sure. Would it do wonders? Maybe. But in a year that you got a team like Kansas City that is on a downward trend, which is alarming, how fair is it to say that the Patriots just maybe could sneak into the playoffs as a wild card? And how fair is it to also say that this Patriots team is not good enough to compete for a playoff spot this season?
So look, I think, I rule out nothing ever. Okay. Do I like where they are right now? No. Would I bet on them to make the playoffs? No. If they get into the playoffs, would I bet on them to make some noise? No. Okay. So I think there were better teams in the conference than them. There's certainly better teams in the league than them.
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you what I do like. Okay. And that is that I feel like they're starting to get a little better, particularly on offense.
Yeah.
So now the defense, I don't know. That's been a major disappointment, although they did do a much better job stopping the run last week against the Jets. I feel like they're getting a little bit better there. It feels like they're starting to settle into some of the instability on the offensive line defense. Some of that stuff has gone away.
Yeah.
They've had a couple of chances already to beat good teams, and they can't get over the hump. They can't get out of their own way, and they lose. Tampa Bay, Dallas. Okay, now you get another one on the road at the Chargers. You're coming off a decisive win. Wasn't perfect. It was a horrible opponent. What they need more than anything is to beat a team that we didn't see coming. Okay. The Jets in Houston suck.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
awful. So again, those are games we look at and say, even though they're the Patriots and they're not what they were with Brady, you got to win those games. I mean, if you lose those games, then you're in big trouble. So they won those games. Fine. They need to win one that we didn't necessarily expect. So if they go into LA and beat the Chargers and they can come out, let's just say that they were to be able to win that game 31-20 and Jones looks good and the defense isn't great, but makes a couple of plays and they pull it out. Well, now you say, okay, well, now they're 4-4. Now it's Carolina, and Carolina's no great shakes. Now you can win that one. And then, okay, after that, and I don't have the schedule in front of me. I know that, Tennessee's in there and
Cleveland as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Cleveland is the one Cleveland's the game after that. And then you look at that and say, okay, Cleveland's got more talent, but they're not playing great. And so now if they can win a couple and they can get to 7-5 or, 6-4, whatever. Now we're thinking differently and they're thinking differently. Right. So, it can change over the course of the year if you have a young team and they start to get better. So again, no, I don't want you to take this and twist it. So I am not.
Get out of my mind.
I am not predicting that they are going to win. I'm just telling you that it can turn.
Yeah.
Right. It can turn. And, if they can get one of those wins that they can just turn a little on, then all of a sudden, maybe they think they're better than they really are. And they start buying into the coach and they start winning, and again, I'm not expecting a run to the Super Bowl, but I thought 11-6 this year was a realistic goal. Now I look like an idiot, which is not the first time, but I would tell you, can they get to 10-7 and will 10-7 get them in? Yeah, I think 10-7 will get them in. Will they win in the first round? I doubt it. Depends on who they play, what the matchup is.
Yeah.
But, it would start if they could just beat a pretty good team. Beat a team that doesn't suck. Okay. Because the Jets and the Texans blow. Those are bad football teams. If they could do that, then I think we start to look at them a little differently and we say, okay, the middle class is the biggest part of the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're in the middle class and you can beat middle class teams, well then, with your coach and a quarterback who doesn't make mistakes, maybe you can sneak into the playoffs and then going into next year, now you're talking, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that the offense is starting to perform better. And I would agree with that assessment, but I think the biggest thing for me is situational football. This is a team that absolutely owned the NFL in situational football, but this year I have called out and I've done several videos on Twitter in which I've called out the Patriots in certain situations, not going for it on 4th and 3 against Tampa Bay. Yeah. That to me still makes me mad when I think about it, where that was a very doable situation in terms of converting it the way that offense was rolling at the end of that game. And then the game against Dallas, in which that you should have won that game. They were good enough to win that game, but turnovers and bad decision-making in key situations in that game is what did them in. Is it fair to say that if the Patriots are able to address that flaw, situational football in which that they excelled for 19 years, does this team feel as if they have a chance to make some noise and to create chaos in the AFC playoff picture?
I would say yes. Yeah. I mean, I would say yes. And again, I don't know that I'm betting on that happening, but if you were to tell me, the one thing they're supposed to do with Bill Belichick as a coach is protect the football, don't commit penalties, convert on 3rd down, right? Just stay in it. And they haven't done that. So, and I would say basic things too, like stop the run or what have you. So at times you look at them and say, what the hell is this? Like, and I feel like a lot of the problems in the early part of the year are on the coach because, you went out and got all this talent. You got a quarterback that everyone said is NFL ready and relatively mistake-free. And for his age, he is. But, you're fumbling all over the place. You committed penalties. You made stupid decisions. You didn't have the balls to go for it on 4th down. Like, at what point are you actually going to start trusting your team and coaching them up? Yeah. And so, let's face it, with or without Brady, they won a lot of games over the years just doing that because the other team was the one doing all the stupid stuff. So yeah, my answer is yes. If they get to that point where they can, just eliminate mistakes, do the basic simple things and keep moving forward. Yeah, they can, they will make teams beat them instead of beating themselves. And that can go a long way in life,
No, for sure.
football, right? So, I don't love some of their personnel. I feel like the roster's not as good as we think. And the quarterback is still young, so you're going to get young mistakes.
Yeah.
But I do think, if you look at the offense over the last few weeks, they've been in the mid to high 20s twice. And then, last week they put up 50 on the Jets.
For sure.
Not that is what they are, but the point is they've scored in the mid to high 20s or low 30s, if you want to call it, over the last 3 weeks. So, it feels like they're getting better there. And if they can protect the football and score some points, then they'll be in games.
Absolutely. And a couple of Celtics questions for you. First one, I like Ime Udoka a lot already in terms of his ability to be forthright, straight to the point, no nonsense. But I keep coming back to this part of the Celtics team in which that I've been saying this since the summer. Something has got to change, and it's got to change starting with the personnel. And it's become increasingly clear to me, based on the early results of this season, as they lost again last night to the Washington Wizards of all teams, pardon me. And I am so frustrated with this team already, in which that the makeup with this team reeks entitlement. I look at this team, I look at Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Yeah, they're superstars, but they haven't won anything, and they have this behavior and they have this mentality in which that, well, we've accomplished a lot already, when in reality it's like, no, you haven't done much. So you have Ime Udoka coming out already. In fact, I think it was this past Friday, in which that he flat out called out the team and said the lack of focus and attention on defense is quite striking.
Yeah.
So what is it with this Celtics team that, and when you look at this roster and you say to yourself, yes, they have two cornerstone superstars, but they are so far away from being a legitimate championship contender that it's not even funny.
Okay, so I think it's Tatum. Okay, I think that in that league, the best player sets the tone.
Yeah.
And so, because they all know who the best player on the team is, and they know who's going to get the ball at the end of the game for the most part. Okay. And so now look, that game last night against Washington, it was frustrating because they had 2 chances to win at the end of regulation, at the end of the first overtime. They missed them both, and then they lost it in the second overtime. Now, like, they did a good job hanging around and actually having a chance to win, because it felt like they could never get over the hump in that game. Never really get the lead and get control of the game. I thought in the first overtime they had it and they gave it back.
Oh yeah.
So in any case, but the big one to me is Tatum. And I'll give you an example of what drives me crazy with Jayson Tatum, because I think it speaks to the mindset of the team. And you use the word entitlement, and I think that that's right. Jayson Tatum is effectively, a number 1 pick in the draft kind of talent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Celtics took him at 3rd. They said they would have taken him number 1. Markelle Fultz went number 1 in that draft. Tatum was the best player in the draft.
Yeah.
So, Tatum is, to me, effectively a number 1 pick. And that guy, to me, when he goes to the basket, should not be going to the basket looking for a foul.
Yeah.
He should be going to the basket saying, if you hit me, I'm still going to score, and I'm going to make the free throw too.
Mm-hmm.
So his mindset, to me, has got to get, he can't, the bitching about the fouls drives me bananas.
It's a James Harden move.
Yeah. So look, LeBron James did it. It's become more, it's always been a thing in the league with star players, but Tatum literally stops playing and throws his arms up. Okay. And I would say, instead of going to the basket in a finesse way, especially if you're going to work out and bulk up like you did during the off season, instead of going to the basket in a finesse kind of way, go to the basket strong, with the intention of scoring, even if you are getting fouled. And if you do that and have this attitude of F you, I'm going in there come hell or high water, I bet you the rest of the team will fall right in step.
Oh, absolutely.
So look, Brown is a good player, but Tatum's the better of the two. And if Tatum wants to win and Tatum wants to set the standard, the other guys aren't going to have a choice. They have to get in line or they're going to look like idiots. And so, you know, to me, I always go to the star player. I think that guy sets the tone.
Absolutely. And I look at Marcus Smart, and one of the things that I mentioned to Christian Arcand like over the summer on one night, and I told him, like, listen, I hate the contract that the Celtics gave to Marcus Smart for so many reasons. Number one, he's a solid defensive player, but offensively, he is too inconsistent for my liking for me to be giving him that kind of money. And what you've seen so far in the early going with this season, and I know that it's early, but there's a lot that I've seen already. And I was at the game on Wednesday night against the Wizards, and I'm saying to myself, like, what the hell? What the hell is Marcus Smart doing? Again, chucking up 3-point attempts like he's Steph Curry, and it's like, no, buddy, you're not a 3-point shooter. You're better off attacking the rim or settling for the mid-range shot, which he continually needs to work on to improve on. And I am just frustrated with Marcus Smart, considering that the big point that I made to Arcand was, if you're going to pay him that kind of money, you need to demand more. Why is it that Brad Stevens said, hey, you know, we're going to give you this kind of money, and we're going to just let you continue to play the game that you've always played up until this point? Do you think that this contract for Marcus Smart is concerning?
So I would say yes, but it's not the money that bothers me, because in that league, look, you know, you either sign a player for the money, because again, the contracts are all outrageous.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, he ended up getting what, 18 million, somewhere around there.
So, yeah.
You know, and you say, okay, well, you know, James Harden and Steph Curry are making almost 50, like, or around 50. So we're talking about big numbers, you know, in the 40s and 50s. Oh, yeah. So is Marcus Smart worth 18 million a year? I mean, in the real world, like, we'd say, come on. But in that league, probably, I guess. So my issue with Smart is, do they really need him? Like, last night they played their best defensive game of the year, I thought. And I'm not telling you it was great, but it was their best of the year.
Oh, by
he
far.
Wasn't on the floor.
Yeah. Better than it was against Charlotte, against the Wizards, and definitely against the Toronto Raptors, the home opener. That was a train wreck. Absolutely.
And so if he's not going to give him that, then independent of what I'm paying him, what's he giving me? I need that defensive bite every night. I need it every night. I thought Al Horford played a great defensive game last night. You know, Horford, I thought, was able to have like 6 blocks or something, but he was engaged.
Yes.
You know, he was active, and Horford's not a shot blocker, never has been. But, you know, he can play fundamental sound defense, and, you know, he can block shot. I'm not trying to minimize him, but I thought for the most part, the defense overall wasn't great, but it was better, and it was their best of the year. Smart was nowhere to be found in that game. He obviously didn't play, neither did Robert Williams, for that matter, who's probably their second best defensive player, or in the conversation in terms of ability. So, you know, to me, it's just all about that attitude of playing defense. And if Smart's not going to bring that, then you don't need him. I mean, you can find guys to do what he does if you're going to do that. So would I trade him? Yeah, I like Udoka's bluntness too. And I think that he was brought in to tap into Tatum and Brown, and which I think is the most important aspect for a head coach, and Stevens couldn't do it.
Absolutely.
Okay, Stevens wasn't getting through to those guys. They were tuning them out. So the X's and O's in the NBA to me are a little less important than being able to get your players to buy in and motivate them. So, you know, the fact that, you know, we're 5 or 6 games in and it still looks like Tatum is kind of drifting, for lack of a better word, to me now is on Tatum. Like, you know, we could blame Stevens for it before. We can blame Udoka for it now. The bottom line is it's on Tatum. And, you know, and as it pertains to Smart, again, I think if Tatum were to dig in, I'm going back to Tatum because I really do believe this, Shukri. In that league, your star player's got to be a driving force. He's got to be a driving force. And so, you know, Marcus Smart in the right role on the right team is still a valuable player. But if he's not going to bring it on him, you know, do it upon himself to bring the heat every night, defensively, then, what are we doing? I mean, put him in a package, trade for someone else, and, let's try to find that guy.
Absolutely. And last question, well, quick Bruins question for you.
Sure.
I have noticed that Patrice Bergeron has not looked like himself. And although that, yes, he's been everything to the Bruins for the last 18 seasons, and we all know what his pedigree is, no questions asked. But I've noticed that he hasn't been the same offensive player that he's been in the past. Whereas you're still getting the effort defensively, as he's the best defensive forward in the NHL, no question. But I've noticed that he's not anchoring that top line the way that he has previously. Is it time to be concerned for Patrice Bergeron, considering that his comments during the summer, and I pointed this out on Twitter, saying that I wouldn't be surprised if this was Bergeron's final year as a Bruin, considering his statements, considering the overturn in the roster the last couple of seasons, and the direction that the Bruins organization is going in. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Bergeron's been a shell of himself, if you ask me. And this is another guy who, we all like. And look, as we say on our show, no sacred cows. So, and Bergeron's as close as you're going to get, because he's just generally an impeccable professional, right? Plays both ends of the ice, shows up, plays hurt, is not a diva, just like the model pro athlete, really, in a lot of ways. Okay. Maybe not every way, but a lot of ways. He's killing him right now. He's killing him. So I asked this question on Twitter last night that, any theories as to what's wrong with the Bruins first line? Okay. Just because I was curious as to what people were going to say. And, because Pasternak's got his head up his ass too.
Oh my God. Yeah. That game against Carolina was a prime example.
So like, Marchand's playing well, I think. Marchand looks the same to me.
Yeah.
But the other two guys, no. And most of the people who replied to the tweet said Bergeron, said what you said. And I feel like it's Bergeron. And I thought last night there were points where he tried to wake himself up a little bit. There was a play in the corner where he went to give a hit and he went flying. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. I thought he shot the puck a little bit more. He had some good opportunities last night. His game last night was a little bit better. But dude, you're dead on. I mean, he's not the same, or hasn't been. Now, is it going that way? Is he going to be? Maybe. Maybe he's tired of playing. Maybe he didn't work as hard during the offseason. It's taking a little while to get him up to speed. Whatever it is, he's not the same guy. And if he's not the same guy, they're in trouble.
Absolutely. Tony Massarotti, co-host of Felger Mazz on 98.5 The Sports Hub and NBC Sports Boston, weekdays from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mr. Massarotti, it's been an absolute thrill, and I'm sorry I went well over the 30 minutes. I apologize greatly. But seriously, it's been an honor to have you on the podcast, and I appreciate you taking the time out to talk with me this morning about all things Boston sports, and especially on an emotional morning for a lot of people, considering the passing of Jerry Remy and everything else.
Well, so look, first of all, don't apologize for the extra time. It was a pleasure talking to you. You're clearly passionate about sports, and reach out anytime. Maybe somewhere down the road we can try to do this again.
Absolutely, my pleasure. It'll be my pleasure to do so.
Absolutely.